it a couple more minutes to allow people to tell in. Thank you again.
Ronan Stagger.
Mr. Goyer, I believe we can proceed.
Thanks, Abel. I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself there. Well, good evening, or good morning, I guess, depending on your latitude and longitude. I want to thank you all for joining us. My name is John Goyer, and I'm the Executive Director for Southeast Asia with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is focused on promoting international alignment around flexible, risk-based approaches to cybersecurity among businesses of all sizes in all industry sectors globally. We encourage capacity building, workforce development, and information sharing between the public and the private sector. We believe that public-private collaborations and partnerships make companies and governments alike stronger while weakening our adversaries and cyber criminals and bad actors. So we were very pleased when the U.S. State Department and MITRE reached out to us to help increase global awareness and to support their new cybersecurity development framework. As technology and automation increase at every level, whether the home, the individual devices, or networks, obviously the opportunity for bad actors to attack and disrupt those systems likewise increases. The cybersecurity landscape, of course, is dynamic. It changes continually and it changes rapidly. Both the public and the private sectors need the workers, the human capital, capable of meeting the cybersecurity challenge associated with ever-changing architectures, applications, and networks. So simply put, a strong cybersecurity workforce is essential. The U.S. Chamber has a long-standing collaborative relationship with the U.S. State Department on a variety of global digital policy issues. And so with those brief framing remarks, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker. Elizabeth Vish is the Policy Advisor in the Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues at the U.S. Department of State. In that role, she's responsible for department policy on cyber capacity building and cyber policy engagement, including in sub-Saharan Africa. Ms. Vish joined the U.S. government as a Presidential Management Fellow in 2013, and she's worked on foreign policy and economic issues in both the Economic and Business Bureau at the State Department, as well as at the Department of the Treasury. Before joining the federal government, she worked in the nonprofit sector on democracy and governance issues, including in Africa. She graduated with honors from the master's program at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies with dual concentrations in international economics and Southeast Asian studies. Elizabeth, I have to say, it's always nice to meet and to introduce a fellow SAIS graduate. So thank you for being with us. The virtual floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. And it's absolutely always fun to intersect with other SAIS Southeast Asia people. So great to connect. Yeah, thank you. I want to start by thanking the Chamber for hosting this event. We're really looking forward to the discussion, and I see from the participants in this list that we have really people from all over Southeast Asia. You guys can hear me?
Sorry, a quick housekeeping note. I'm going to ask people that if you're not speaking, if you could please mute your microphone. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Not at all. Am I okay? Am I good enough? Loud? Great. All right. Well, again, thanks so much. And I'm really pleased with this. So the United States is committed to strengthening global cyber capacities to protect and promote an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet. As outlined in the 2018 National Cyber Strategy, cyber capacity building equips partners to protect themselves and assist the United States in addressing threats that target mutual interest, and build strategic partnerships that promote cybersecurity best practices and encourage investment and open new economic markets. To this end, the department leverages diplomatic engagement and foreign assistance to help states develop a national approach to developing strong cybersecurity. The State Department has been actively engaged on capacity building in partnership with the interagency and multi-stakeholder communities. And our capacity building work covers 5 major themes. First, we assist governments to develop and implement national cyber strategies and effective whole-of-government approaches to policies relating to cyberspace. Second, we work to strengthen national incident management capabilities and protect critical infrastructure. Third, we work to combat cybercrime through promoting the Budapest Convention and providing practical legal training. Fourth, we work to promote public-private sector collaboration, including on cybersecurity standards. And finally, and most relevant for today's discussion, we work to build a culture of cybersecurity through awareness and workforce development. The U.S. government's broad effort around workforce development is spearheaded by the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, under their National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, NICE. I have to say, that's one of my favorite government acronyms ever. So well done, Danielle and Amy and team. The mission of NICE is to energize and promote a robust network of and an ecosystem of cybersecurity education, training, and workforce development. The framework itself is currently open for comment, and I know that we have true NICE experts in the conversation today. So hopefully, if there are additions to this introduction, you guys from the NICE team will chime in when we open the floor for discussion. It's been our pleasure to collaborate with the NICE team in a number of different capacity building efforts. One that I'll just mention, just to give you a flavor for the kind of work that we're doing, is a series of workshops on these topics done in collaboration with the George C. Marshall Center in Garmisch, Germany. So in those engagements, we're looking at topics like how to increase prioritization of cybersecurity education, how to integrate educational elements into national cyber strategies, and how to build effective cybersecurity programs, education programs. So on behalf of the Department of State, I want to again thank you for engaging on this topic and for giving us a chance to hear from you about your needs for workforce development. I'm particularly interested to hear about your insights on workforce development as it pertains to Southeast Asia. So things that are happening in the region, ways that we can come together as private sector, nonprofit sector, government, to together sort of enhance capacity and cybersecurity workforce development. We know that to get the workforce that all of us need, we have to have a combined effort. Formal education, on-the-job training, an iterative process, engaging the private sector with educational institutions, with government. And our hope is that events like these give us a chance to hear from you all how we can play a role, how you can play a role, how we can collaborate to get the workforce we need to defend networks and enhance all of our security online. And with that, I'll pass it back to John and the AmCham team, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation this morning for most of you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I, for my part, will lateral it over to Abel.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. And Elizabeth, thank you very much for the opening remarks. And my name is Abel Torres. I'm a Senior Director within the Center for Global Regulatory Cooperation at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, known as GRC. GRC seeks to align trade, regulatory, and competition policy in support of open and competitive markets. Before I introduce the next speaker, just a little bit more housekeeping rules. Please, if you could keep your line on mute, that would be very helpful. Per the agenda, there will be an open Q&A session, and there are two ways you can ask your questions after the remarks that will be led here in a moment. There was a chat function where you can include in the chat function the question there, and then I'll happily read that question or facilitate for you. And there's also a wave function or raise your hand function where you can also ask questions. Now to introduce our next speaker to discuss in detail the framework, Ms. Cynthia Wright. Ms. Cynthia Wright is a cybersecurity strategy and governance principal for the MITRE Corporation, where she co-developed a methodology to assess national cyber capacity building needs. The methodology is used directly to assist more than a dozen countries in Africa, Central and Eastern Europe, Asia Pacific, and the Americas. Cynthia also assisted the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in drafting the U.S. National Cyber Incident Response Plan and incentivizing market-driven approaches to cyber risk management. Prior to MITRE, she was a U.S. military officer with over 20 years of experience in national security, cyber strategy, and policy. Cynthia has a master's degree in National Resource Strategy from the National Defense University, as well as 2 additional master's degrees in military operations and interdisciplinary studies, and a BS from the United States Air Force. With pleasure, the mic is all yours, Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to hit mute. All right, we just proved that I can, in fact, share this. So 1 second while I bring it up, please. Make sure I'm getting the right briefing. For some reason, Teams is giving me many more options than I really want. Okay, that's interesting.
Cynthia, would you like me to share my screen?
I believe you should be seeing it now. Are you?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay. All right. So I'm Cynthia Wright. Thank you for the introduction, Abel. I'm just going to jump right into to this framework, and we'll get all the explanatory pieces as we go. Looks like I've got a little bit of a delay in the slides popping up. Okay. I think most of the people who are participating in this conference tonight are familiar with why the focus on cyber development workforce is a major concern. Every sector in every economy is increasingly reliant on it, and we have a huge and growing gap in qualified workforce around the world. In some countries, the ability to have a qualified cyber workforce has contributed more than 10% of GDP growth to countries like India. Countries that don't have an adequate cyber workforce can pursue all those other pieces of cyber strategy development and then get stuck because they don't have the ability to sustain it. So it's really one of the most foundational enabling factors that we have found in our work with the State Department. I should say, I guess at that point, we have been working with the State Department for the last 5 years on cyber strategy development and implementation, and workforce is one of the 8 elements that we identified as critical to developing a country's cyber capacity. We didn't really realize until we started working with a lot of countries one-on-one how fundamental it was, how necessary a starting point it was, and how difficult a problem it was for countries to tackle. It's kind of like the oak tree problem. When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, but the next best time is today. And cyber workforce is sort of like that. It would have been ideal if some of these things could have been dealt with some time ago, but as it is, the faster that we are able to tackle this problem, the sooner we're going to be able to tackle other problems in cyber capacity building worldwide. Several reports, including McKinsey, have put the expected number of unfilled cybersecurity jobs worldwide to grow by 350% over 2013 numbers. That's up to 3.5 million worldwide. And yet, even in the United States, in countries that have a pretty robust tech development approach, fewer than 1 in 4 of the candidates applying for positions in the workforce are qualified according to what the employers are expecting in hiring decisions. So the bottom line of that is the employers have invested heavily in cybersecurity technologies. Everyone in all the countries we work with really wants to move forward in digitization of services, of utilities, of products, tourism, every kind of outreach, education, healthcare, every sector, but they have not invested to the same degree in the people necessary to run those technologies, and that's rapidly becoming a critical bottle point. In Asia and the Pacific in particular, there are opportunities for the uses of digital skills that aren't necessarily obvious. In Sri Lanka, for example, there's an e-dairy that's helping people earn $262 more a year per calf by making their veterinary services available to them electronically. Solomon Islands is using it for healthcare in Vanuatu, national disaster planning and adaptation. There are several local programs in different Asian countries that are already out there trying to tackle the problem. And as you'll see, we welcome all comers. We want to work with whatever is out there. We think that there are lots of opportunities to connect the dots in this area. Indonesia has the Accelerated Work Achievement and Readiness for Employment, the AWARE program. They're currently training 2,000 students a year and engaging 100 local firms in their partnership programs. Microsoft has got a partnership program out there with ASEAN. Grab has partnered with Microsoft to upskill Grab drivers through cybersecurity education. And Google's got the Go Digital ASEAN effort that's focused on micro and small enterprises and youth, trying to give them the appropriate skills. So Asia is really already in a lot of areas focused on this. We are trying to help identify some kind of common approaches, some foundational concepts for how to do that. Our workforce development approach is one that follows some other framework development efforts that we have done on behalf of the State Department. Please don't try to read that eye chart to the left. I will tell you what it depicts so that you don't have to say, you got to be kidding me. If you could read it, the top row would essentially describe these things that I don't know if you guys can see my little circling cursor, but I'm circling the cursor around that top main bullet and the sub-bullets of it. That top line shows the kinds of sources that we looked at in trying to figure out what makes a good workforce development framework approach. We looked at a bunch of different nations around the world with different sizes, different economic bases, different key sectors, key industry sectors. We looked at a bunch of U.S. states, kind of in the same light, because a lot of U.S. states have also struggled with this problem as they've tried to move from, say, an agricultural economy to a digital one, or a manufacturing economy to a digital one, and their economic bases tend to be closer to the economy size of some of the nations that we're concerned with. Development NGOs, including World Bank and Gates, economic experts, the Aspen Institute in particular, have some amazing products out there to look at, and then a bunch of cybersecurity SMEs, from the perspective of, what does it mean to be a cybersecurity workforce? And taking all of those things together, we worked kind of inductively. We just started reading broadly across those research areas and came up with that column that you see over there on the left. And if you could read that column, you would find that the big green section focuses on traditional education. That's everything from K through 12 up through colleges, universities, routine, normal, the kind of training programs, certification programs you'd be familiar with. The next blue section down is non-traditional training. That includes internships, work-study programs, drawing from the gaming industry, drawing from cyber ranges or utilizing cyber ranges, just about anything that came up in the literature as interesting we included there. Orange is the role of government, and in this case we're looking at government not as an employer but as a facilitator, a convener, someone who can create or eliminate barriers and incentives. Yellow is employers, what the employer brings to the workforce development ecosystem in terms of what they're looking for, what they offer, how they approach workforce development. And then the purple at the bottom, and we have found this to be relevant in Asia more than some places, is the cultural aspects of workforce development, cyber workforce development, whether the culture encourages risk-taking, whether it encourages innovation, whether it encourages people kind of to step outside their box, or if you get into a training channel and that's your channel. And then we synthesized these into a framework. And the way we did that was all the color that's on this chart, what color it is doesn't matter. Those are just kind of cues for us. Blue is a best practice, and red is a no kidding, we really need this and it's not there. But in general, any block of color in a given horizontal line means that the source in question found that to be worth mentioning in their materials. And as we identify these big lines of color across different categories, it kind of showed us where the major overlaps, gaps, commonalities, things like that were in the research across all of those different sources. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the high-level conclusions that we drew from that. First of all, we found that everybody says that they need to broaden their cyber workforce pool. Beyond just university comp sci majors who've always wanted to do this when they grow up. And yet we find that if you're not already in that track, you probably don't know about cyber or ICT job opportunities. And if you do know about them, you don't feel qualified for them. There are perceptions across the board of anything related to cyber or related technologies as nerdy, math intensive, elite, having very high qualifications and lots of barriers to entry. Women in particular have these perceptions and are unlikely to apply for these kinds of jobs. At the same time, employers don't have accurate assessments of their cyber-related needs, and that distorts the training incentives. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But employers are asking for the moon, and then wondering why nobody has the moon to bring them. Most of the current paths that are out there right now focus on universities and certs, but what we found in terms of what skills are actually in demand is that it's very much the middle skills area, and that has a huge opportunity for practical hands-on training. Doesn't have to be a university degree. In fact, that may lead people down a path that is not, it's either not accessible to them or is going to have them kind of skip over where the bulk of the demand is. We found that the keys to developing a cyber workforce start at the beginning. Start with the oak tree metaphor, K through 12 education. People need to come out of their basic primary schooling with at least a familiarity and comfort with technology. It doesn't have to, there doesn't have to be a programming class. It just has to be, some willingness to interact with the technology and to understand that they can do that. A common lexicon. This is where NICE comes in. We found that in almost every ecosystem we looked at, students and/or would-be employees, employers, government, and training and university programs are not speaking the same language when they're talking about developing key skill areas for the cyber workforce or fulfilling those key skill areas. And that's really what NICE brings to this project for us, is that common lexicon that if we can get everybody kind of on board with that, can help describe those better. And my understanding is that the new NICE update effort that's going on is going to focus more on competencies, which is even more in line with what we've seen the need to be for common lexicon. Public-private partnerships is absolutely critical. No one party in this ecosystem, not government, not employers, not academia, has all the pieces to develop a country's national cyber workforce. Really, those three entities working together is key to making this work on a broad national scale. And then you're going to see this over and over again in this briefing. I can't stress it enough. That middle skill, hands-on training is fundamental to developing the cyber workforce at the level these skills are needed. So what are the level these skills are needed? And this is the pyramid of skills that we came up with. If we start at the bottom, you'll see that K through 12 discussion, kind of the need for a general tech familiarity and the teachers who can provide that. And that's both to K through 12 learners, but also their parents, their communities, youth, that kind of thing. By far, the bulk of the skills that are needed in the economies we looked at are these two middle areas, and in particular, this broad one that's called IT and cyber middle skills. And if you think about it, you'll find that it makes sense that what most companies need, if you're not talking about a company that specializes in programming, if you're just talking about a company that uses IT or cyber to accomplish their mission, then mostly what they need those guys to do is system administration. They need them to build, operate, and maintain their security architecture. They need them to recognize an incident when they see it, do some basic response, and provide help desk and user support. That is the bulk of what most companies need from their IT shops, their cyber workforce. On top of that, there's a pretty significant layer of software and app development, but for the most part, this is not rocket science software development. This is not developing the new OS or creating the new quantum computer and the software to run on it. This is modular software. It's app development, for instance, to develop an app to connect to a particular company's users, or some kind of middleware that can connect, for instance, a proprietary human resources system to a different business system. Those kinds of kind of connectware or middleware functions, and then outreach and kind of marketing apps. So these things together, and again, those are not, you don't have to go to university to be able to do those things. You can, in the US, you can learn that in summer camp. It's definitely something that is accessible to people without, calculus. On top of that, we do have some higher end skills, and in a lot of higher end companies and sectors like banking, for instance, there is a need for these functions, forensics, pen testing in particular, some active defense, definitely auditing, things like that, and then some educated oversight, people who understand cyber well enough to inform business leaders. But for the most part, if we're talking about developing a cyber workforce, we're really looking at that middle skills and software function. So I've referred to the ecosystems a couple of different times. This is a notional ecosystem depiction that we've developed to try and capture the idea that there's not just one path. There are a dozen different ways to come at a cyber workforce development, and which ways you pick depends on what your ecosystem is strong in. So, for instance, if your country's ecosystem is really trying to get on the mobile banking or the international banking bandwagon, then the private sector and banking in that area is going to be a huge draw, a huge partner for employment talent, someone to look to in developing your workforce. Maybe you're focused more on an industrial economy, resource extraction, mineral resources, something like that, critical infrastructure and industry, something more on the operational technology than the information technology. Then that's where your partners reside. How we interact with those partners, whether it's through vocational training, whether you find them in the gaming community, whether you grow your own when you're in the private sector, or take a more traditional path from K-12 over to university. All of those are possible routes, and what we really want to emphasize is there is no one way. Different countries have different strengths and also different gaps. The idea is to look across the ecosystem and find what partnerships are available to create, to strengthen, to leverage, and what kind of mechanisms, for instance, career progression programs, internships, grants, scholarships, things like that, the ability to apply nanodegrees. How can you work within that ecosystem to create the specific mechanisms that are going to help that country develop the cyber workforce it needs? Because one of the things that we have found successful in the culture piece and in the employer piece of that matrix I showed you a few minutes ago is that it really makes a difference whether people are learning cyber and IT for cyber and IT's sake, or whether they're learning cyber and IT for in order to do something else, to do critical infrastructure jobs, to do banking jobs, to do business jobs, to start companies, to do any of those kind of functions. And not only does that cyber for what mindset kind of broaden the educational aperture, but it really changes how non-traditional applicants, particularly women, are going to look at the cyber and IT fields. It really helps de-nerdify those kind of jobs and make them something that someone can envision themselves doing. They don't see themselves as a nerd behind a keyboard. They see themselves doing business where part of their business is social media outreach or data analysis or something. And that shifts the focus enough for them to consider that something that they might find accessible. So how the ecosystem can be leveraged in any particular country is key. We talked a little bit about NICE already. My guess is that most of the people in this conference understand already what NICE is. NICE provides a kind of a modular, very descriptive approach to the specific skills that make up a cybersecurity workforce, and then breaks those into categories: security, operate, maintain, protect and defend, investigate, analyze. They're all over here. What this pie chart shows you is really the same thing as the pyramid. This yellow, orange, and kind of teal blue down here on the bottom, together those things are operate, maintain, protect and defend, and provision. So build, operate, and maintain that security stack and administer it is almost 2/3 of your cybersecurity job openings. So it's just kind of a validation of that approach. And depending on where an employer or a university, curriculum developer wants to focus, kind of helps them figure out which area, and then within that area, what skills, and then how to describe those skills. We find that many employers, they've come to cyber through the cyber for what path, and they already have descriptions. They already have ways that they describe their workforce, the way they hire, the way they do whatever, and those ways tend to be, with regard to cyber, focused on, we don't really know what we're doing, so we're going to put the highest qualifications out there and hope for the best. And so we're finding that employers are asking for things like 3 to 5 years experience, a Bachelor of Science in Comp Sci or network engineering or something related, and some high-level certs like a CISSP, when what the jobs they're offering involve are something more like a Security Plus or a Network Plus certificate and some basic hands-on awareness skills. So here's some different ways that we think that we can participate in or help other people who are participating in an economy, like your companies, your agencies, to help figure out how they can engage with that ecosystem we talked about. We can help look at context development. What are those? Who are the big players in that particular ecosystem? Who are the potential partners? What's going to drive local workforce, cyber workforce needs? Because that's going to help figure out who your partnerships are and what those programs need to look like. Trying to convene employers and government representatives together to figure out what the needs and goals are and what their and what those initiatives should look like. Identify any barriers. Look for regional partnerships. In a lot of cases, infrastructure is shared, or systems across major industries like the banking sector are shared, or the petroleum sector, and there are opportunities there to help, like, kind of hit above your weight in some ways with regional assistant needs assessments, really helping people figure out, this one's important, educating the market, helping government figure out how they can educate the market, how they can reach out to businesses that don't regard themselves as players in the cyber ecosystem and show them that they are. Show them that they do have needs, that government can help them fill them, that they all need to work together in these partnerships, in order to really create this knowledge economy and this connectivity-enabled economy. And then there's a bunch of implementation options out there. There are hands-on training programs all over the place. Many companies, IBM has a great one. Lots of companies have developed these, trying to help connect people with those programs that are already out there, or helping them figure out what they might need to develop a program on their own, and exposing them to the kinds of best practices we've got out there. I've got a million more slides that I will not go over tonight, so that we have time for the Q&A. But if you have questions, we might call those up. You all have, I think, the full presentation, so you might find that some of the things you're interested in are answered in those slides. And I am going to stop sharing for a second in order to actually see you guys and see the chat window. All right, Abel, do you want to guide that, or?
Yes.
Great.
Well, thank you for that excellent overview. And in the presentation, you really highlighted, I think, some of the misalignments, but also a lot of the opportunities that exist in the current cybersecurity education and the broader training landscape. You identified several examples of successful programs, and one in particular was the NICE program, and that really holds promise, I think, as models for addressing the skills gap by policymakers, by educators and employers, all of which are, I believe, presented on this call to a degree. And so I would like to officially open up the open Q&A portion of the agenda. There are two ways to ask questions. So you can either type it in the chat function, or you can raise your hand, and there's a function at the top of your screen where then we can identify you, and then of course you can ask your question directly to Cynthia.
I see a hand raised. Let me see if I call on you. Let me see. Did that work?
Yes, Robin, please proceed.
Yeah, hi, Cynthia. My name is Robin Russell, and I'm calling in on behalf of Cybercom J54, the Partnerships Division. But I actually spent about 13 years at State, and in that capacity worked on cyber policy, but also foreign assistance programs. So kudos to everyone and your hard work on rolling this out. I'm just curious, we do the security cooperation on the military side, and we run into a lot of speed bumps trying to use federal funding to do cyber capacity building, primarily with Congress, using the Section 3.3 money and whatnot. We haven't been able to do it successfully. So I'm just curious, maybe somebody from State can answer this question. Cynthia, maybe how did you get over that hurdle with Congress? I mean, one, I guess this is a three-part question. One, how much foreign assistance money is there for this program? Two, who at State is administering it? I understand that NIST is the implementing arm, but is it being, done through INL? Is SCCI actually putting the money out? And then 3, how did you get it through Congress? Over.
Sure. Maybe I'd be the right person to take that if that's okay. So again, Elizabeth Fish at SCCI. There is some INL money that does cyber-related things, but SCCI has also gotten, I think, our current funding is about $7 million. It's mostly economic support funds, so it can't be used for military or for law enforcement purposes. So we can use that kind of money we've used economic support funds for cyber strategy policy. We've used economic support funds for other broad cyber capacity building work. Our CERT work is cyber capacity building. Maybe Jared, do you want to speak about this specific program?
Sure. And I would just turn it over to Anne if she has anything else to add. But EAP also has a variety of ESF funds. And so through those funds, we have a direct contract with MITRE to provide cyber capacity building activities for ESF eligible countries in the Indo-Pacific region. So like Elizabeth said, our funds are pretty much focused on, we can provide like guidance on national cyber strategies and cyber workforce development and various other things, but we are limited in providing assistance to militaries and law enforcement officials. I do know that, there are other funding mechanisms that can be used to train foreign militaries, maybe like FMF, or the stuff that INL would use. But yeah, our funds are very much restricted for, military trainings or engaging on that front.
And Robin, if you want to talk offline, maybe John can connect us, because I'd be interested in talking with you more about the sort of nitty-gritty details of how we notify Congress of our plans.
I also have one quick thing that might help. We have talked with both INDOPACOM and AFRICOM about cyber workforce development as part of their defense security cooperation agenda through the DSCA, offices and program. They have both. So they both have kind of come at this, not from a capacity building perspective per se, but from a creating interoperable partners perspective. Sorry, there comes the dog, of course. So INDOPACOM and AFRICOM both have people there who also know how to do this.
Hey, if I could just add one quick point. This is Danny Larson from South and Central Asian Affairs. Just on the military security cooperation question. So, believe it or not, peacekeeping operations funds also has the flexibility to do cyber capacity building on the military side. The PM Bureau here at State manages a program called the Global Defense Reform Program, GDRP, which has the ability to support some cyber advisory program development with militaries as well. That's kind of still in the nascent stages of getting off the ground, but we do have that flexibility as well. So I am aware of the challenge with Section 333, and I think we want to keep working with you all on that, but there are other options that we can discuss with you all at Cybercom. Over.
Hey, Robin, it's Phil Lark from the Marshall Center. If you want to give me an email or call, I'm glad to give you a hand and talk to you about some of the challenges with 333. But we've done work with those types of resources for each of the COCOMs.
Excellent, thank you. I have a question here for you, Cynthia. If you look back over, the last few years, there have been multiple operational toolboxes that have, to a degree, been designed to facilitate the development of national level cybersecurity capacity building programs. Obviously those include things like skills or human capital and technological resources. Some of them have been on policy and these investment strategies to tackle some of the challenges more broadly in the cyber domain. But related to workforce development, I look at things like the UK Cyber Retraining Academy or the National Centers of Academic Excellence and US Cyber Challenge. These are all programs that have helped point, a way toward, in my mind, to building a more robust pipeline for cyber talent in general. How is this framework different from what has been, sort of research or done on cyber workforce development? So I guess my question is really around what makes the MITRE framework unique in addressing this challenge.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Well, one aspect is gets straight back to your lead-in. All three of those programs were among the research sources that we used to develop this model. So our intention was to find all the best things out there, right? To look at how every individual program was tackling this, and then to try and draw the kinds of generalities that can apply across the board. The UK Reskilling Academy actually provided one whole column on that matrix that you saw, and it was one of the ones that provided most. That one and the Aspen Institute provided most of the insights into reskilling opportunities. I think that the biggest difference between this and any other one single program is that kind of all-inclusive approach, and the idea that you start where you're at. It's not formulaic. It's not a maturity model. We're not saying you have to do this and then this and then this. We're saying look at the economy that you've got, find where your potential partners are, find what the existing strengths are that you can leverage, help facilitate that gap analysis, and then forge those partnerships and create the programs that you need, using these kind of guidelines for what's out there, using NICE to help frame it, using that concept of the middle skills to help people realize this is achievable. You don't have to go from zero to a CISSP for every employee. This is something you can teach high schoolers to do. And if high schoolers is what you got, that's where we want to help you start.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia. We have a question from Jay Gullish, or Jacob Gullish, who is the Executive Director for the U.S.-India Business Council at the Chamber. And Jay, did you want to ask your question, or I can go ahead and read it?
Sure, I can jump in. Hi, how are you?
Hi.
How does the framework link to academia? You sort of hinted that you work with what you have, but certain portions of the pyramid do require some, base level. But not only, there's a scale issue as well. If you may not have sufficient universities or professors or other sort of, academic assets, how do you start the process to sort of develop that? Or do you, just as you said, just sort of work around it and work with what you got?
So what we'd really like to do, really like to see with regard to academia, is to convene practitioners from both the primary school level and universities and whatever a country might have in between, whether they have something like a community college, a tier college, that middle tier of not quite university but above high school. Get those folks in the room with employers and with government who can provide those mechanisms, and with the NICE framework as a reference, and start talking through what does your program look like today, how does it compare to what employers need, and is there something else you could do? For instance, some employers are partnering directly with universities in work-study programs where they partner with the university to make sure that the courses, for instance, are offered after work hours, and the student with the employer's stipend takes a few classes at night, and they work for that company during the day as like an apprentice level worker. So what the employer gets out of that is at the end of the apprenticeship, they've got someone who is already familiar with their corporate culture, with their particular systems. They know people. They have a foot in the door for hiring. What the university gets out of it is those direct employer relationships, which sometimes can bring funding, certainly can bring direction. And then ideally, if we can bring government into that loop, we'd like to be able to share the wealth a little bit, because what we find in a lot of these countries is that while industry desperately needs cyber workers, government government also desperately needs cyber workers and can rarely afford to pay for them. So without trying to create a kind of a tit-for-tat relationship, the idea that there might be a way to create, for instance, scholarship for service programs or something like that in partnership with both industry and academia is something that we'd like to help countries that might be amenable to that explore. And then I want to make one more point about universities, and that's I happen to sit on the innovation board of the University of Colorado, Denver, specifically with regard to IT. And I was just talking to them about how they can increase their contributions to the local cyber workforce. And one of the things we talked about was that most students who go into IT through the university route only get exposure to IT when they're already in that program. And what we'd like to see is universities making at least a fundamental tech layer part of their core curriculum. Just like you take your basic language, your basic social studies, economics, whatever it is, those basic 101 degrees, to get that foot in the door on tech readiness and to understand that technology applies to every business sector. It's not a nerd thing. And if there was one thing I could change in university curriculum around the world, that would be it. Would be to add this digital familiarity in the same way we add other core functions. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, and a follow-up question, if I may. So there's obviously a tremendous amount of research that's gone down into this, and you talk a lot about tailoring and customizing for each situation. So have you gone into, or are you able to go into a particular setting and do that sort of analysis and sort of come out with I don't want to say a draft plan, but at least a blueprint, a framework, or some guidelines to help, a government, industry, a sector actually, take the knowledge you've developed and kind of tailor it to something that's implementable in their own, location or country? And then the follow-up question there is if that's something that you're looking at, what's the mechanism that all of us on this, call could say, hey, how do I make this work? I work on India. How do I make this work in a state in India or a city, a smart city or something like that?
Yes. The framework is new. We are looking for countries to pilot it with. We're working with the State Department to identify a couple of countries, where we can pilot this. But notionally speaking, our launch was inconveniently timed to coincide with the inability to travel anywhere or engage in person. But ideally, when the world returns to normal, or if necessary before then, but preferably this is kind of an in-person thing. Yes, the idea would be that someone, it doesn't necessarily have to be us, but that in a particular country, we start with kind of a context assessment. Who are those key players and how might they potentially interact, so that you can get kind of the guest list, the participant list, bring those people together and start talking through what do you perceive your needs are? What do you perceive you're not getting out of the economy? For you academics who are participating, what do you perceive that you're providing? What is keeping you from providing more? And from government, is there anything that you can participate in helping resolve those barriers? Bring those folks together and help them collectively craft this. So when we talk about tailoring a workforce development approach, we don't mean us. We mean helping partners work together to tailor a program that works for all of them within a country. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I mean, at the chamber, we do have a couple of groupings of executives that, might be good think tanks or to bounce off some of these ideas, or get together in a smaller group and actually think about how to leverage the research into, again, the sort of smaller, bite-sized chunks that can make it actionable in a particular country. So I really appreciated the overview and would like to follow up with you at some other point to see if we can, at least in the world that I cover, which is India, see if we can, connect some of the right dots to think about the right, target area. I don't want to call it a pilot, but at least, think about how to apply it in a very specific way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if all this craziness drags on, we will probably end up trying to figure out how to provide facilitation materials or something that can help people move forward in that. In the meantime, we are happy to hear about any programs you might already have going. Any of the companies or agencies or NGOs or anything, academic institutions that are out there, what do you already have that's in work? And what do you find is effective and not effective in that? We are certainly happy to add to our knowledge, especially with regard to Asia. So if you have any of those things, or if you have particular partnerships, perhaps the State Department is in a position to help talk through some of those and figure out who might be viable partners and what might work for establishing conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. And we have about maybe 70 people or so on the line, maybe a little fewer now. But that was an interesting point you make in terms of some of the engagements that the private sector and the companies and other organizations have. And I would ask a question then to the participants of this call. Are there any particular programs that your companies already are running or already engaged in that really focus and work on the nation's cyber workforce? It's a general question to the audience. I think it's a good lead in, Cynthia, in terms of where that conversation was going.
And if people don't have that on the tip of their tongue or at their fingertips, we would be happy to take things that if you have a program but you just don't really know the details and you want to contribute that to the conversation, we'd be happy to help collate those and get them back out to the group.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of good. This is Vince from the U.S. Chamber. I'm familiar with a couple of programs run through Augusta University down in Augusta, Georgia, similarly situated like San Antonio, next to a component, the DoD component cyber agency, and they've got an interesting public-private partnership, not only with ArcCyber but also through the university system to feed into some of the DoD requirements. But they also had the state spent $100 million down there on a cyber range, specifically so they could have university students work with Southern Company to tabletop red team, blue team cyber incidents on behalf of a major multi-state electric utility. I think that's a great example that I'm familiar with. And then a second one through Florida International University, just outside of Miami, Florida. They have built or are building a cyber range there to fulfill a number of U.S. private sector companies. I think Dell, Trend Micro, and Cisco might be a couple of the founding members, and there might be a few folks from those organizations that are on this call that can speak to that. But they're doing similar skilled workforce apprenticeship, dual hatting, in both being a full-time 4-year undergraduate student, going into a range, serving a functionality there, and then having a promise of a job upon graduation. They also turn out a large number of students every year to fulfill cleared U.S. government positions within DoD, CIA, FBI, and a number of other. An interesting sleeper school, not UTSA or some of the others.
Yeah, that is actually San Antonio was one of the cities that we used for that matrix that I showed you, and that's a really excellent idea of starting a really excellent example of starting where you are. San Antonio, because of its strong relationship both with banking and then of course with Texas with its own utility grid, and then that military relationship, they really leveraged that. They decided they wanted to be a cyber city, and they leveraged that specific relationship to ask to go to the military as a major local employer, both for civilians and military, and say, what do you need? What would make you hire our graduates? And they lined that up with the military programs, which are kind of inherent apprenticeship journeyman kind of programs, and made that partnership work. So that's a really excellent example.
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting observations from the top of that grid are some of the cities. So San Antonio, the NCR, Michigan, Israel, Estonia, Singapore, for a whole host of different reasons. They all intuitively jump off the page at me, and being smart on cyber, smart on the right kind of economic incentives, and having the right both knowledge, and then people just want to live in these cities as well, which is hard for someone to go to, I don't know, Anchorage, Alaska, and want to do cyber up there. I'm sorry if anyone's from Anchorage, but it's interesting because Denver is, as you know, is a real hotspot, and then people are moving west to Salt Lake City. And finding even more, kind of a cooler and hipper and a different kind of a vibe, but it's an attractive place for folks to work. So I think the livability of these jobs is an important.
I'm from Anchorage, and I will say it's a pretty cool place, and I would love to work from there if I possibly could.
Yeah,
Anchorage is beautiful. I went to.
If I could jump off of that for one quick second, that's another excellent example. I happen to be in Denver, right? But so if I was building an ecosystem in Denver, I would look to. We have a burgeoning healthcare industry, some resource. We do a lot of oil and gas, and space, aerospace. So in this economy, it's not, for instance, so much banking as it might be in San Antonio, but in Denver, those are the industries I'd go talk to: is healthcare, oil and gas, and the aerospace industry, to find those partnerships and figure out what are your jobs, what are your gaps, how can we help you.
Yeah, and for Singapore, and I think we have a couple of folks from AmCham Singapore that are on, and certainly would look to kind of their expertise. But as a financial capital, you have the FSISAC has opened an information sharing and analysis center, part of their kind of global network in Singapore. What sort of threat hunting, malware analysis, or other skilled professions in the threat intelligence space do they need to fully staff up there and service the financial services industry, a global financial services industry from cyber risk. So I think that would be, to your point, gravitating towards where the industry is strongest. That'd be interesting.
In helping government, trying to help national governments, it's also nice for some industries like banking, where there's a really tight coupling in a lot of countries with the government, to look at those are kind of richer opportunities for government employer partnerships, where there's an advantage to the employee, the employer, and the government if they can work together in trying to grow that workforce.
What do you see as some of the you go through, and the pyramid does a really good job of articulating, what are some of the fundamental skills that organizations are hiring for right now, but where's the kind of market going? What are the skills that are needed 5 years down the line? Is it, you allude to certification, and Abel comes from a third-party conformity assessment body, so he has some experience in this. But where are testing and conformity assessment skills kind of on the priority list? Are there professions like that are growing in need, like ICS and SCADA security experts, mobile endpoint experts, software experts? Do you forecast out where some of the needs are 5 years down the line?
We did. So I'll rattle off a couple of them. A big one is data analytics. As more and more companies are understanding the value of big data, they want to figure out how to collect, use, secure, and store and secure that kind of data. So data analytics is a growing field. Cloud security is a huge one, cloud engineering, cloud security. And I really like the cloud idea for developing countries because so many of them don't have this huge workforce. The opportunity to move things to a cloud, although it makes some governments nervous, if they get the right cloud provider, that can really help balance the burden with the commercial sector on securing their spaces. So cloud services is a huge one. AI, not so much in the, in the I can't do that, Dave level of AI, but at the, the expert system, helping you with healthcare decisions, helping you, answer low-level questions without needing a human in the loop. Those kinds of fields are really growing. And then to your point, as more and more countries want to implement things like NIST standards or some kind of set of standards, a key aspect of that is being able to know if you did it right. And so the ability to audit. And then I should make one more plug, because the other thing that employers are saying that they're really missing is soft skills. They really need geeks to be able to communicate and explain what they're doing and why it's important. And so that's another up and coming focus area.
Cynthia, you may have taken my question away on the soft skills. I wanted to get a better sense in terms of where the soft skills fit within, just this, aside from looking at building out the technical proficiencies.
I have a speech that is much funnier than this speech on helping the C-suite of companies understand cyber risk, and that whole concept of making leadership who are not cyber focused, they're not IT focused, they didn't grow up in that world, understand why cyber is important to them, is super important in getting these industries to invest both in workforce and just in technologies and approaches to modernize their economies. And they're not going to understand that if the people who do get it, who do understand cyber and tech, can't communicate the importance of it, can't explain how cyber risk equates to business risk, can't bring in that those kind of those listening and communication skills, but also visualization skills, just general logical analysis skills. A lot of business majors that come that really focus on these kind of things, those skills are great. The ability to say cyber's a profit and loss issue. It can increase your profits and it can create losses you never anticipated. And those kinds of opportunities to bring soft skills into the market, I think, are really under-recognized.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia. We are coming at 9:34, so we have roughly about 5 more minutes for Q&A. We can go a little over that. Before we begin, Vince's sort of closing remarks. Barring any questions from anyone else, I have a couple questions, and I think it gets to where we can be of most help, trying to work down that line long term. And, it's been a pleasure working with you on this, and the Chamber looks forward to further engaging you on this topic. And, when you think about the U.S. Chamber and AmChams, one of our core functions is outreach and awareness with governments throughout the world. And, how can, there's 2 questions here. And so, in the ideal world, how can we really, leverage the framework as a resource when we are engaging governments on policies related to cybersecurity? You mentioned different areas and emerging technologies like AI, 5G. We're engaged in all of those things from a policy standpoint. And, and the second question is, what can we do to make cyber and cyber workforce development a priority in these countries?
So I think that there's a couple things that you guys could do. I think one is helping with that educate the market piece, helping the governments and the companies that you work with understand what they have to gain in this space and why they should care about cyber workforce development. I think that's an important piece. I think offering, working a little bit as a convener is also a great opportunity. Someone who can spread the word, who can bring different players together at both the policy level and the industry level. That's a key aspect. And then maybe helping to craft some of those policies that can create incentives for barriers, private partnerships. That sounds very vague, so I'm going to give you an Eastern Europe example. We found in a lot of post-Soviet countries, for instance, that it's really hard to create public-private partnerships because there's a perception that if government works in the industry, it's corruption by definition. And so they have laws in place that make that really hard to do. So working with governments to help modify policies so that they still meet the government's needs and yet eliminate barriers and provide incentives, that's something that you guys can help with. That would be awesome.
Very good. Thank you, Ines. believe a question just came in. The question is, how can we work in Bangladesh?
I think that's an Elizabeth question.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take that. And I'll also maybe use this as my sort of like sum up, knowing that we're running a little bit on time. So in general, this is the first of the conversations that we're hoping to have. And so for each of your government or each of the countries where you're working, if you want to have a conversation with us about what's going on with workforce development, then I would say reach out to State Department and to Cynthia also. And we will work with our team and Danny Larson and team and others at State to sort of see whether a pilot project is available for your individual country or whether we can work you into regional efforts. But this is just the first of conversations, and our next step is to have a series of smaller conversations with the private sector throughout the region. So send us an email and we'll go from there.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And what we can do, and I'll make sure that everyone has the appropriate contact information, the participants on this line. We are unfortunately at time, so I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I wanted to give this over to Vince to provide a few remarks, and we'll close this out.
Ava, thanks so much. Cynthia, Elizabeth, Jared, really appreciate your time and expertise tonight. Look forward to working with you to kind of advance the initiatives of State's cyber workforce development framework in Southeast Asia and beyond. So thanks again. Jared, I think you had a few thoughts you wanted to layer on. And Alaska is beautiful, by the way. It's really nice. So apologies.
It's really great in the summer. It's a little bit unpleasant in the winter, I will give you.
I did one spring break in Alyeska. It was
there
gorgeous.
We go.
So
now you're talking.
Jared, over to you.
Thanks, Vince. And all I wanted to say was just to re-echo what Elizabeth had mentioned, that, this is really the first of many long-term conversations. We really want to start working more closely with you all, the private sector in the Indo-Pacific region. And we really want to find, solutions to the various barriers that exist within cyber workforce development. So, please, if you have a, particular barrier trying to get over or overcome, and, you want to potentially do like a pilot program, we're very much interested in working with you to help develop that program. And, I just encourage you all to reach out to us. And I'm sure Abel can provide you all with our contact information if you already have it. So thank you all for joining, and, much appreciate Cynthia and everyone who were speaking today. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, the rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.